Hello and welcome to Mr. Haas's video series on World War I. This video will be part 1 in a series that will break down the causes of World War I, the fighting that took place, as well as America's later involvement in the war. The video today will be focusing in on the causes of World War I and what really triggered the war to start. Now, one of the first major causes of World War I was actually the rise of nationalism in Europe. So nationalism is essentially the idea that your nation is the best and you take great pride in your nation, which can be a good thing, but in extreme scenarios can actually lead to major problems. And during the late 1800s, nationalism started to grow in Europe. Europeans actually began to believe that nations should just be made up of one ethnic group. So you would have a nation of just German people, a nation of just French people, a nation of just Spanish people. And these different nations all believed that their race was actually the best. So this growth in nationalism actually spurred a lot of tensions in Europe. It was also during this time that we saw a rise in the idea of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism gets back to Charles Darwin's scientific theory of the survival of the fittest within the animal kingdom and evolution, but in this context it was used more to justify colonialism and the idea that certain races and ethnic groups of people were stronger and better than other races and ethnic groups of people. This idea of social Darwinism ultimately led to the persecution of minority ethnic groups throughout Europe and the rest of the world, and this increase in tensions in Europe was exacerbated by this rising nationalism. In addition to all this, there was economic competition between nations as well. So during this time, we'd seen European nations colonizing the rest of the world and expanding their powers through imperialism, and it ultimately turned into a contest to see who could colonize the most land and who could use this to become the richest. At the time, England was a preeminent superpower, as well as Germany, and Austria-Hungary was taking over land throughout Eastern Europe as well. So this was a big competition between the European nations, which also led to increased tensions as the European nations were essentially fighting over the same territories. Europe also had problems with militarism, which produced an arms race. Now, militarism is the idea of having a strong military to protect your country and believing that military should come first. It was during the later part of the 1800s that this idea really started to grow. Now, nations throughout Europe actually began to expect a war. It wasn't a matter of if there was going to be war, but when there was going to be a war. So this led to an arms race between Germany, Britain, France, and Russia to build the biggest military. Germany was really dedicated to this as they started to sink most of their country's government spending into building the strongest military possible, and Britain had developed a very robust navy that they used to colonize the rest of the world. Now, another big contributing factor to World War I was actually the development of alliances between nations. So around this time, many of these European nations began to build alliances with each other and develop these treaties where if one nation was dragged into war, another nation would back them up and act as their ally. In 1914, we saw Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary form the Triple Alliance. About a year after that, France, Russia, and Britain formed the Triple Entente. And these alliances essentially meant that if one of these nations went to battle, you had to support them no matter what. Now, this led to a tangling of alliances, as you can see that Britain and Russia are nowhere near each other on the map, and actually in between them both are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Now, at this time, Europe was a powder keg ready to explode, but the thing that really lit the fuse was actually the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand was the Archduke of Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was one of the more powerful European empires at the time, and they had actually taken over parts of Serbia and Bosnia. Now, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were on a tour visiting Bosnia, and during this time, he was actually assassinated by Serbian nationalists. The Serbian group went by the name the Black Hand, and they were led by a Gavrilo Princip, who was responsible for ultimately shooting and killing both the Archduke and his wife. The assassination ultimately kicked off World War I. Austria-Hungary responded to the assassination of their Archduke by demanding Serbia turn over all of those involved, and that Austria-Hungary would occupy Serbia until this matter was resolved. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany actually announced to Austria-Hungary that he would support them in war no matter what, and that Germany would be on their side. So on July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia, and this really triggered the chain reaction. At the time, Russia was an ally of Serbia, and as we know with these alliances, you had to support your friends in battle. So, Russia decided to declare war against Austria-Hungary. This led Germany, who was obviously Austria-Hungary's ally, to then declare war against Russia. France, who was Russia's ally, then declared war against Germany, and Germany, in response to France getting involved, decided to invade Belgium and start to march on Paris. Great Britain, who was both France and Belgium's ally, saw this and decided to declare war on Germany, and later on the Ottoman Turkish Empire joined in with Germany and Austria to help out in the cause. So, this is going to wrap up part 1 of our video series on World War I. And as we can see from this first video, things are about to get really tense throughout Europe, where there's going to be a lot of fighting and a lot of nations getting involved. Please come back for part 2, where we will be talking more about the battle on the Western Front, as well as the advancements in technology and how they led to total destructive war throughout Europe.